So on the brink of the next major that we're going to have in CSGO, which is ESL One Cologne, which takes place later on this month in August, as well as we've been hearing some news about some other big events that NA will attend, such as Cloud9, with this new Pro League Invitational in Dubai that's coming up, and there's been talks of IEM in San Jose, and basically it seems like the big string of tournaments we've seen over the last, few weeks or couple of months are going to kind of continue with the major and with some other big events already planned. And obviously, we're about to see our next seasons of Pro League for CEVO, as well as the ESCA ESL combined league. And of course, MLG partnered with CEVO in that Pro League. So there's about to be a whole bunch of stuff that happens for international CS in general, but obviously some elements of NA are going to be involved in that. At the very least, we're trying to qualify for lands for the two, pro leagues in the NA scene, as well as I'm sure Face It will be kicking in with another season for their, combined EU and NA league as well, and of course just lands in general. So because we just got to see a bunch of the NA teams play to try to qualify for the next major, ESL One Cologne. As well as we had a couple of lands before that, CEVO land where a lot of NA teams were involved. Basically, I just want to try to take a look at where we are right now in the NA scene. I kind of do these kind of how can I put it? These comprehensive videos that really just kind of take the whole scene and kind of analyze where it is now quite a lot. I try to do it often, and usually it's a really good time to do one right before we're actually going to see some of our teams compete in a major, in a Valve major. And so obviously I'll talk about the two NA representatives that are going into that major for NA, which is going to be Cloud9 and CLG. So congrats to those guys. They were able to qualify. And I'll also mention some of the other teams that are kind of at the top of the scene that we saw at the qualifiers for Cologne just a couple of days before I'm recording this video at the Burbank qualifiers, and just kind of discuss where we're at and where we can go and all that good stuff, right? So that's kind of the intro of what this video is going to be. So I'll start out with Cloud9, obviously one of the two teams that are going to represent NA at ESL One in Cologne. Obviously, they've really made a name for themselves lately, and I've already done a couple of videos on Cloud9 along the way that you can check out if you want some deeper analysis of Cloud9, but I won't go too crazy deep in this video. But obviously, they had the 3 second-place finishes. This obviously starts at the ESL, ESCA Pro League finals, where they were able to make their way through the tournament and play against Fnatic in the best-of-5 final, and even take a map off Fnatic and challenge them in a couple of their maps really well. And this was like them finally making a huge turning point after some disappointing performances, I guess, at Gfinity, though they were quite a new team at that point. So that's kind of expected they would have a few hurdles they'd have to get past first before they really started performing. And you saw some hints of them really starting to get their act together at Gfinity Summer 1 when they got a map off of Envious and they were they were challenging a bit better, but it really did come to the peak, so to speak, whenever they were at those ESCA finals. And then obviously they carried that over, made a couple of more finals between ESWC and Face It Stage 2 at DreamHack Valencia, and then obviously we see them get their 4th top 4 finish in a row whenever they went to the CEVO land and made the playoffs there. And I guess you could say 5 top 4s in a row if you want to count the Cologne qualifiers where they qualified for Cologne, but at least 4 top 4s in a row. So this is definitely, like I said, a huge turnaround for Cloud9. And a lot of people wonder how were they able to make this turnaround. And like I said, I've done a lot more detailed videos on Cloud9, so I don't want to go into heavy detail. But a lot of this has been because well-defined roles. Mostly this is Freakazoid, being the dedicated entry fragger. Even when he doesn't put up big numbers, he's playing his role. He's playing it well. He's doing his job. He can always be relied on to be the entry fragger. This has opened up new opportunities for other players on the team, like obviously Skittle being the dedicated op and him playing quite well throughout his entire tenure with Cloud9. You have Shroud, who's being used more effectively on the T side, kind of being a second guy into the site. Theoretically, obviously doesn't always work out that way, but he's more involved in executions is my point, and he's able to go in with the comfort of Freakazoid having already kind of cleared the area, or at least gotten him information. He knows where to look, he knows where to frag, and so you're getting more production out of Shroud on the T side, and he's always been a quite good CT player, to be honest, being able to hold a spot, and he's even been used more aggressively on CT sides now too, especially when you think about maps like Cash, where he always kind of anchored the A-bomb site, and now you're seeing him use much more an aggressive mid set setups towards like the mid garage or vents or what have you. And so they're just getting more production out of Shroud, and he's really shaping up to be that star player that we've been looking for this team. Next to Scoodle's op, who he's like, number 2 opper in the world right now behind Guardian probably. Just, the impact that he has, the plays that he can make late round as well as just throughout the round. Like, he's a clutch player, plus he can open up areas of the map for you in the early round. So he's just really, really versatile. It's well-defined roles, and really nothing kind of is now able to be that wild card. He always tried to be in the past, where he would sometimes lurk, sometimes entry frag, sometimes comfortable in one spot on CT, but then you shift somewhere else. Now he's playing a lot of rotation positions on the CT side, so he can move around more freely because other things are quite locked down, either with the anchor of Shroud's op or, Skadoodle's op, or when Shroud anchor sites at times. This is especially prevalent on Inferno, playing that kind of pit position. But this happens, across the entire map pool. In the past, though, there wasn't like a dedicated entry. So if he wasn't entering, they were really struggling to find an entry. And obviously, Cloud9 always had issues having a dedicated op before they even picked up Shazam. That was the first time they really had one. Sean would do it, but he never really enjoyed it. You saw the pass back and forth between him and Simphis. It just didn't work out. So now they have a dedicated op. They have a dedicated entry fragger, and this opens up nothing to be kind of that wild card. He will lurk at times. He will kind of be one of the main guys in the execute at times. Because everyone else is so set in place, he can kind of float around, and it doesn't cause a burden. In fact, it opens him up to make plays, and he seems much more comfortable, and his form has been great. And that's really just, in general, a good form from the team. Like I said, Freakazoid can at times put up big numbers, fill in the gap if one of the other guys aren't playing well. But even if he doesn't, he's still doing his job. The trio of Nothing, Skadoodle, and Shroud has consistently been performing really, really well. I hardly ever see Skadoodle have an off game, period. He's always doing really well with the op, it seems. Shroud is the kind of player where it seems like about, I would say, 70 to 75% of the time you're getting a really good game out of him. The other 30 to 25 to 30% of the time he's either giving you at least an average performance. Don't get me wrong, he does have his off games here or there where he's just not really doing anything at all, but that only happens maybe between 10 and 20% of the time. So the other percentage of time he's playing quite well. So you're getting good form out of the 3 main players on the team, Nothing, Shroud, and Skadoodle, and you're even having some games here from Freakazoid at times that are quite good. And obviously the leadership has been good on the team. There is no second voice that overrules Sean Garrett. He's able to really be the firm leader of the team, really take his vision out and make sure that it's implemented properly. Good mid-round calls, good adjustments being made, really good scouting and anti-stratting is what he's really getting a lot of credit for from the community. And so they're just they've done so many things to become a better team than what they were before. But it really does come down to good form from their players, better set roles, for most of the players on the team, which frees up Nothing to beat Float. And then just really good leadership and tactics out of Sean. And Sean's always been a really smart guy, a really good tactician, really good at scouting teams. But there's been different periods of time where he's really focused on scouting other teams and periods of time where he's really just focused on his own team's play and not really so much worried about anti-stratting other teams. So he's gone through these different phases of leadership. But I think the big difference is that he knows how to say no. He knows how to filter suggestions better. And he also, like I said, doesn't have anyone overruling him anymore. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. I've gone deeper in detail in past videos, but that's just the short version, even though it still was quite long, right? So that's kind of Cloud9 through all these top 2 finishes and such. But when they went to the CEVO LAN, we'll admit they did struggle a bit. Even against CLG in the groups, we saw them have to make a comeback on Cobble after going down in the first half. And then we also saw them struggling to close out a game on Cash, where they had a big 13-2 lead from the T side in the first half of Cash, but then it goes into overtime. So there was a little bit of struggle there. Though I guess you could maybe kind of debate whether it's just CLG growing and becoming a better team. They were kind of using a stand-in at that event with Stanksington in place of Finesse and Cutler first time calling at a LAN. And so you can kind of play that either way you want to. But definitely you have to, at least to some degree, say that Cloud9 really struggled to close out a game there. And that was a bit concerning against a team that they should be able to beat, a team that they have never really struggled with online. In fact, I think going into this LAN event, this is the first time I think they had played, they had played CLG at the ESL Pro League Finals, and they had really no trouble beating CLG there, and they had an 8-0 record online against them on maps going into the ESL LAN. So this was a bit different for them to struggle against CLG. And they lose against Mouse Sports in groups. This includes getting smashed on Cash, which has been like a really big map for Cloud9 throughout all their top 2 finishes. Then they got beat, a pretty close game on Dust too, but none of their stars were really shining against Mouse Sports, to be quite honest. It's mostly on Cash. I mean, on D2 we did see some good stuff out of like the typical faces that would put up good numbers. Like I said, that was a close game, but they just didn't really have any CT side on Dust 2 against Mouse Sports, to be honest. They actually put up a good T side, but CT just wasn't there. And then they just got crushed by Cash. Cash, to be honest, where no one really performed well. So this was kind of shocking to see, Cloud9 struggle against Mouse Sports, a team that is on the rise. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we saw them beating Virtus Pro at Gfinity Summer 1. We saw them put up some good numbers against other teams at this same exact event. But yeah, it was definitely just kind of different to see them struggle whenever they had done so well against like some of the top European teams like Fnatic and Navi. Granted, they kind of got crushed by TSM at Face It Stage 2. There really isn't much to talk about there, but still playing against some other really good European teams and doing well against those guys. And then obviously lose to Virtus Pro in the playoffs. And I guess this wasn't too surprising. They had struggled against Virtus Pro head-to-head throughout the Gfinity events. Didn't really even have to play them at ESL. They started their top 2 streak. But they did get a map this time off Virtus Pro, so that was a slight improvement. They beat him on Cash. Almost had the comeback on Inferno and Mat 3 as well to make it to the finals, but just wasn't quite there. Really couldn't get anything going on T side. They had a pretty decent CT side to try to come back, but it just didn't happen. And then they got kind of crushed on Train, which is, historically been a really good map for Cloud9. We've seen them put up some good wins on the map in international play lately, and in regional play in North America, it's been their best, and they're like the best Train team in NA. Liquid debatably has, beaten them on Train head-to-head and also had some good records online in NA on Train, but we really did expect Cloud9 to be a really solid Train team. Now, obviously, Virtus Pro also one of the best Train teams in the world. I think they've only maybe lost it once out of 6 plays or something like that at this point. So, I mean, they're also quite a strong Train team. So I guess it wasn't too disappointing how the results went against Virtus Pro. Like I said, it's always a European team they've seen to struggle against head-to-head. But yeah, they finally went from making finals to just a top 4 finish. And at an event where there was really only like 3 big teams people were expecting to do big things besides Cloud9, a top 4 finish is kind of neutral finish. And they didn't really gain any ground. I don't think they really lost any ground either. They had no issues qualifying for Cologne, however. I mean, they beat Noble, Liquid, Elevate in that order with no real trouble, beating the first 2 teams in groups and then playing Elevate a 2-0 series in the playoffs to get the spot. So no real issues there. I think here's the big thing with Cloud9 going forward now is that now they have time to rest. I think they're going to take a 10-day or week kind of break. They're all going to get home, just kind of chill out for a few days. Except for Shroud, who will probably stream, if we're honest about it. But the rest of the guys will probably chill out for a few days, right? But most importantly, they're going to be able to finally actually practice, which is something they haven't really been able to do these last few weeks. Like, sure, they can kind of review their demos and see what went wrong, maybe work on some things to improve, maybe scout their opponents, work on some anti-stratting, but they haven't really been able to probably sit down in a server as a 5 for maybe more than a day or two, but like between traveling and the actual playing of the event, to really sit down and work on tactics or to work on how they play a map. And we obviously know that they have some huge issues right now with Inferno and Mirage. Inferno has been a bit more evident just because we've really seen them struggle on T sides in all their plays on Inferno. Their CT side has gotten quite better, to be honest. Like, I think with Skadoodle opping the way he is in mid, like I said, Shroud always being a solid, pit player, kind of anchoring that side of the map. And they've had like some mixture of success and failure on their B setups with, Freakazoid always being over there and kind of Sean and Nothing. I guess it's usually been Sean and Freak, but I saw a little bit at the Cologne qualifiers. Nothing was playing B a little bit on their Inferno game that they played against Elevate. So maybe they're still trying to find their footing exactly on the CT side. But their CT side does seem much better. I mean, we even saw the comeback effort against Virtus Pro at the CEVO finals. And then, of course, we even saw them beat Liquid at ESWC based on a really good CT side. And granted, I know that's an NA team, but they were even struggling against NA teams when they first got this 5 together. And obviously before this 5 got together, back when they had Shazam and Sympha still, they were struggling against NA teams on Inferno as well. So they're showing improvement against NA teams, and their CT side in general looks better, but their T side definitely still is lacking. When you look at Mirage, the historical veto for this team in the NA scene, definitely in the international scene, that's been the case. I've seen him play it a couple times now. We had him with the win against Fnatic. I think that was at Face It Stage 2. before the finals, like the semifinals, where they actually 2-0'd Fnatic based off of this Mirage win. I think I have that right. But that didn't really look anything special. They were mostly just counter-strating Fnatic, just walking to the A bomb site because they knew how passive Fnatic played it, saving their nades for the post plant, out-fragging Fnatic basically, just having a really hot game with their fraggers while Fnatic looked a bit off with their star players. But then we saw them get absolutely decimated by TSM on Mirage, a team that had their act together on Mirage, a team that couldn't really anti-strat as well, a team that wasn't, allowing Cloud9 to walk all over them and out-frag them. So 50% win rate, only played it twice. It's still definitely a problem, right? It still definitely needs to be worked on. I think the other 5 maps in the pool are quite good for Cloud9. Like I said, I think their train can still be quite good despite their big loss to Virtus Pro, who is another really good train team. I think their cash has obviously proved to be able to be big for them. I know their overpass has been losses, but they show like decent form on the map. They seem to know how to play the map. Most of the times they lose rounds, honestly, based on like terrible post-plant situations. And things of that nature, whereas I think they actually play the map pretty well strategically. Obviously, Dust 2, they can crank out numbers on there. Cobble, they've had some big wins on that map, throughout some of the tournaments they've played in against some really good teams, like whenever they kind of shocked everyone by beating Fnatic on that map at the ESL finals. So, yeah, I think the rest of the map is pretty much fine for them. I think it really is just, at this point in time, now that they have the time to really practice, they have to kind of pick, do we want to fix our Inferno T side? Because I think the CT side is probably there. They could probably sharpen it up a bit, but I think it's already there. So do you want to just fix your Inferno T side and get that manageable, which historically hasn't worked for them, but can they finally really take some time and really hammer away at that? Or can they just work on their whole Mirage? Work on their T side strategically, work on their CT side. It's either fix half of a map in Inferno or fix your whole map on Mirage. I think at this point, I would rather see them work on Mirage. I think there's more opportunities for them on T-side Mirage than there is on Inferno T-side. I think that there's more open space for Freakazoid to work with. Freakazoid has said in interviews he doesn't like Inferno at all, and if your entry fragger is struggling and doesn't like the map and it's not like a good map for him, you need him to be able to be comfortable and be able to do things for you from an entry position. So I just think that he's more comfortable on Mirage. And even talking with him personally, when I saw him at Sevo Land, this got brought up, and it seemed like Mirage he felt a bit better on. So, yeah, I think Mirage is probably the ticket. They just need to take – I think that's the biggest thing they need to do there in this boot camping phase for Cologne is just work on their Mirage really well. Obviously, you want to scout your opponents and anti-strat like they always have been throughout this run of good form, but I think they really just need to sit down and hammer away at Mirage and just really get it down because you're only going to get one veto and possibly in different situations. And I think like Inferno should be that veto unless they really can figure out their T side. And I'll just kind of leave it at that for Cloud9. I mean, good showing so far. I don't think they've really lost any ground lately. I'm sure they wanted to do better at Sevo, but I think they're still, a top 5 team in the world right now going into the major. I think they have a really good shot at making out of groups, no matter what their group is. Obviously, though, best of ones can make it tough, but I think they can make it out. And then once they get to playoffs, depending on who they get against, they could make another semifinal, get out of the quarterfinals. And they haven't done that since 2013, like the original major, DreamHack winner 2013, when they beat Astana Dragons and made it to the semifinals because of that. And that was back when they were Complexity with a much different roster. Some of these guys, like Skadoodle, have never made it out of groups in a major with all his runs with iBuy Power. Freakazoid's never played in a major, So Shroud, he had the top 8 Cologne, I guess, with this team. Last time around it was in Cologne. So, yeah, I mean, this could be like a big milestone for many of these guys' careers if they can actually, get things going in their boot camp phase going into the major. But I think they could definitely do well. But now we'll move off of Cloud9 and somewhere else. So for CLG, this is a team that historically has always been known for upsetting teams in best of ones. This goes all the way back to LDLC at MLG X Games Aspen, all the way fast forwarding to the ESL finals when they were beating Fnatic and Keat Stars. But they never really had a big best of 3 performance. They still haven't. And it's mostly just been the consistency issues. Or you could even point to the fact that they're really good at scouting an opponent for a best of 1, understanding what map they're going to play them on and really anti-stratting them. In both examples I just mentioned, by the way, against LDLC on Dust 2 at Aspen, most of the time you talk to these guys, they really talk about how Finesse really focused hard on how LDLC played the map, played the CT side, understood the gaps and how to anti-strat them. Same thing with Fnatic on Mirage. They knew they could get Fnatic on Mirage. So they really focused on anti-stratting Fnatic's Mirage. And So like they're really good at anti-stratting teams when they know exactly what map they're going to play on, and they can just really focus on that one map and kind of pick a team apart. But in a best of 3 situation, it's like they can't keep that consistency. And consistency is just in general with their players individually has been an issue. You'll have great games from Tarek, some games not so much. JDM's op. When he's on point, he's at his peak, he can be one of the best oppers in NA, like just behind Skadoodle possibly, even when he's really cranking out the op shots. But some games he's a bit off with the op. And obviously when he has a rifle in his hands, impact is definitely heavily minimized. Huge, decrease, drop off, whatever you want to call it, between when he has an op in his hands or a rifle, which can be a big deal. Cutler's usually pretty consistent, but even here recently I've seen a couple off games from him. I know he's been in-game leading now, so that adds some different pressure and stress to him, so maybe that does take away a bit from the frag game, but still overall pretty consistent fragger for the team. Hayes, huge highs, but also some big lows. Like, obviously against Fnatic, he was huge at the ESL finals. Even at this Cologne qualifier, I saw a couple of good maps from him, but there's also been instances where he's had some tough maps. So overall, as a team, the team suffered from consistency. Like I said, anytime they do something great, you get a little bit excited about them. Then all of a sudden, they kind of do something that's disappointing right afterwards, so you kind of come back down. But like I said, individually, some of their players can have some consistency issues as well. I didn't mention Finesse, but another guy that can have good games but also bad games in pretty much equal shares. There's also been a lot of criticism on this team, from a leadership and communication perspective, from watching POV streams from past events where they seemed really jumbled, they seemed all over the place, seemed to lack a clear leader, seemed like a lot of suggestions and calls were being made. They're a very default-oriented team, though, in general, so I guess it doesn't really necessarily matter. It seems like they just run default quite a lot and just try to react off of teams and play off of the default quite a lot. They do have some set executions. The default's not working out, obviously. Some really, heavy side executions. I think of like Cash, basically, where you see them play default quite a lot, spread across the map, a little bit of mid-control. But then you have your heavy A executes when the default's not working. Coming into the Cologne qualifiers at CEVO Land, they actually challenged Cloud9 much better than they had in the past between all the online play and as well as like the ESL quarterfinals or semifinals, excuse me. They're able to take on the overtime on Cash. They had a good first half lead on him on Cobble in the groups. Close game in Dust 2 as well whenever they actually played him again in the playoffs. Still have never been able to take a map off of Cloud9 though. You think of like the 8 maps I think they've played against each other online. Then 2 maps at ESL, 2 maps here, so that's 12 maps. Still haven't been able to get a map off of Cloud9 out of 12 maps played between LAN and online, so that's not quite a good head-to-head record at all. But they did look better against Cloud9 at CEVO than they had in the past. And obviously, like Liquid kind of coming into CEVO, or going into like CEVO, they were kind of considered like a top 3 team in NA, if not number 2 right behind Cloud9, because obviously like Keyed Stars now, Luminosity is not really an NA team. But they take down Liquid at CEVO. They beat them in the groups 2-1 series there. Looked quite impressive. Most of their players played well, looked good, took down another top NA team. Then they 2-0'd Liquid to qualify for Cologne. And they did so in a much stronger fashion and in a bigger statement than what we saw at CEVO. So I think CLG have now, with these LAN wins against Liquid, how they've looked against Cloud9. They seem to have improved against Cloud9, but still haven't got a win against Cloud9. I think you could safely say that they are the number 2 team in NA right now. And so therefore, if you're thinking of 2 teams going to Cologne, it made sense it would be Cloud9, who's looked really well, definitely established themselves as number 1 in the region. CLG does make sense to be kind of the number 2 team in the region based off of these 2 recent LANs they've played at. And who they've been able to beat, Liquid, the other big challenger in NA. And obviously the fact that other teams like, Ex-Nihilum, Maximum Effort, this Mythic team, some of these other teams are either quite new or have been even more inconsistent than CLG has been. So it just seems like CLG really, their main competition kind of was Liquid, and now they've surpassed Liquid, right? So what can they do to take the next step? When you look at CLG is kind of, I guess, the big question here. Here's the deal, and I hope this isn't taken the wrong way, and I hope no one takes this personally. I never try to personally attack somebody whenever I make these videos, though sometimes it gets taken that way by the players, and many different occasions that's happened. But here's the thing. So Cutler's now the IGL for this team. At least that was the case at CEVO. Obviously, Finesse wasn't there, so Finesse couldn't in-game lead, so obviously someone had to do it, and it was Cutler who stepped up and did it. However, even when they had Finesse at the Cologne qualifiers, Cutler still stayed as the IGL, and apparently that's a move they had made, even a couple of weeks before SIVO. So if they're going to stick with this, where Cutler's going to be the IGL, and he's still consistently putting up decent numbers in some of these games I've seen him play, so it doesn't seem like it's really had a crazy heavy impact on his fragging, in the fact that even if he is the IGL, I'm sure there's a lot of group discussion about what tactics are called, and they've never been like crazy tactical anyhow. I think they can, like, when they read a team well, like and Cutler even says in an interview, when they're like reading a team well with their default, they can make really good adjustments and therefore make really good plays to close out rounds and to make things happen. But if that's the case, if we're going to keep Cutler as the IGL, which means that Finesse is basically now just kind of a lurker or support player, I'm sure he chimes in. But could we consider them making a move here, roster-wise? I mean, here's the deal. Like, Liquid could possibly be in shambles now unless they're going to keep this 5 for the pro leagues for next season, but they're not going to any lands. Definitely didn't make the qualifier. Not looking like they've been invited to anything else. So this is definitely kind of a time where Liquid has to make a decision what they want to do with their roster. At the same time, it looks like the Ex-Nihilum team, the Maximum Effort team, is probably all but dead. So with that said, that's kind of the other two teams in NA that fielded some really big players. And if those players are going to be on the market, it just seems like it would make sense to maybe consider bringing in a different lurker if Finesse is not going to be in-game leading. I'm not saying you have to do it before this major. Like, maybe you want to keep this 5 for the major because you really just want to focus the next, 3 weeks or so really prepping with this 5 and making sure you can get the most out of this 5. But if they are going to make a change, they should make one like right now. I feel like if you want to have a chance to improve what your major is going to be, and I think that they could pick up a person like Hiko, who's going to be on the market as a lurker and who can be a quite skilled lurker for you. You could even consider like Fugly from Liquid, who can play that position. Here's the thing. It doesn't seem like Tarek and Cutler have to be entry fraggers for this team, though they seem to be the main impact riflers for their team that can do entry work. But you can maybe move Cutler to a more passive position since he's going to be in-game leading, in which case you could bring in a more aggressive rifler, like a Nitro, like a Nalij, like a Desi even, perhaps, from Nihilum. Who knows? But I think you could make a move to improve this team with another rifler. And it doesn't even have to be Finesse. It could be Hayes, who has said in the past that he'd be willing to step down if there was someone better and he thought it would improve the team. And I don't think that whoever would step down for one of these guys, they can definitely remain on the team as a coach, which is something I think they really could use. And I think they had one temporarily with Steele, but obviously Steele can't be involved anymore in an official capacity as a coach for this team because of like Valve's little reminder that these guys are banned and they can't be involved at majors and things like that. So you could definitely see like a Hayes or Finesse coach this team, help them with anti-shredding, help them with scouting, help them with practice on finding flaws they need to work on. These guys can still be serviceable for the team and really help the team while you bring in kind of another skilled fragger who can even maybe add something to, like I said, the fragging department of your team. So I think you could at least consider bringing in a player, but you don't necessarily have to. Let's just see what they can do with this 5 at Cologne and then kind of go from there on possibly building up a big team. Because here's the thing, like there's this dichotomy in the NA scene. On the one hand, people always talk about we want roster stability. We want these teams to stick it out. We're sick of seeing roster moves or shuffles after every single ESCA event or whatever, or every 2 or 3 months we see this big shuffle of players. That's one camp. And some regards I can understand that, and I can even agree to it. However, on the other hand, we always see people talking about how the talent's so spread out on multiple teams. We don't have all the talent together on one team. Cloud9 kind of captured some talent, put it all together on one team, but there's still some talented players out there that you could focus in on one team and make like a second NA team that's quite powerful. And if we're going to keep getting second slots to majors and we really want a second NA team to actually make a noise from that second slot, it would make sense to kind of condense this talent on the one team. And I think CLG could be one of the teams to do that, or Liquid. One of those two organizations need to be the one to step up and actually concentrate some of this talent on one team. And I'm just kind of mentioning a couple of suggestions. There could be other moves as well that could do that. But on the other hand, CLG going to this next major, they could still make it out of groups. I mean, like I said, they can get best of one wins against good teams. We've seen them do it time and time again throughout this year. But there still seems to be some issues with consistency on the team from an individual performance perspective as well as just an overall team perspective. I've kind of already gone over some of the pros and cons and other. I think I did a video on CLG right when they picked up JDM, and I really kind of went in depth on the team at that point. Plus, I wrote an article about them for the iBuyPower Invitational a couple of months ago that also kind of went over criticisms and pros and cons about the team. So you can check that stuff out as well for me if you want like more heavy detail about CLG from my perspective. But yeah, these are just some things to consider, I think, at least going forward. But they definitely at least established themselves as number 2 in the region. Now let's see what they can do with some prep, with some boot camping at the next major, despite what moves they may or may not make. So now we'll move on to Liquid. Obviously, going into the Cologne qualifiers, unable to make the Pro League finals. See, they're struggling against EU teams like at Gfinity Spring 2, but they also had some map wins against some EU teams, like against Fnatic, like against Navi. I think it was, the Cash win against Fnatic and like an Overpass win against Navi at Gfinity Spring 2. At ESWC, once again getting crushed by NIP. I think, what was it, like 5 rounds to like 40-something or 50-something rounds between like 4 mats played against NIP or something between 3 events. So really struggled against NIP at least. But they still got the wins over LDLC and KU to make it out of groups at ESWC, but then they lose to Cloud9 in the quarterfinals or whatever of that event. So decent performance, but getting beat by the number 1 team in NA, Cloud9. So kind of a neutral event in my perspective at ESWC. They had DreamHack winner Valencia, or DreamHack Valencia, or the Face It Stage 2, that combination event. Losing NIP again, but do perform better, and then lose to Fnatic. Once again, kind of neutral for me. They lost to Fnatic, number 1 team in the world, and then they lose to NIP, a team they've always struggled against historically. So don't gain any ground, obviously, but I don't think they really lose ground or get worse. They're just not improving. They're like I said, they're neutral. But then we go to the Cologne qualifiers, or excuse me, we go to the CEVO land. Let's go there first. And here, they do lose 0-2, or excuse me, they lose 1-2 to CLG to not be able to make it out of groups and not move on to playoffs at CEVO. They've kind of gone, like head-to-head, I think CLG does have like a map advantage online going into that event. I think it was like 4-2 in CLG's favor. But still, like, Liquid, if they want to be the number 2 team in NA, they want to be the other big team next to Cloud9, you got to be able to beat, CLG. You got to be able to take them out. And they couldn't do it. They lose to them there 1-2 in the series. Then they lose to CLG 0-2, obviously, at the Cologne group stage to not make it to playoffs and to not make it to Cologne. Now, throughout all of this play that I'm talking about here, what can they do to take the next step? What have we noticed from them? One thing I've noticed, it seems like Nitro just hasn't shown nearly as much potential as I used to see out of him back when he was on iBuyPower. And I've heard different stories about this, like him not wanting to commit to entry fragging, him wanting to be more of like a slower pace player or whatever. Though I think at the Cologne qualifiers we did see him kind of embrace more of an entry frag role. Like, for instance, one of the big things I noticed was on Cash, they kind of moved Fugly to more of a lurker. They put Flowsick in Squeaky Door, and then they put Nitro in A main, like a more entry fragger position. He seemed to, have some good moments from there. So maybe he is starting to finally embrace that a bit better. But I still see him not put up the numbers I'm used to seeing from him. And in fact, it seems like a lot of the time, Elise or Fugly will kind of outshine him when we all thought when this team got put together that Nitro would kind of be the star. And he still puts up good numbers here and there, but like it seems like when it really matters, like against Cloud9 at ESWC or on these Cologne qualifiers, I don't see him put the numbers up that need to be there. Like he's going negative in many cases against teams that he really should be able to break out against if he is going to be the star for this team. So I think I have noticed some consistency issues there with Nitro. Fugly's been pretty consistent, though I would say he did have a pretty horrible Mat 2 against CLG at the Cologne qualifiers, but in general he's been pretty consistent, like performance-wise as a fragger. I would say that Elise has had some pretty damn big games for this team between like ESWC and even the Cologne qualifiers. He put up some big numbers at times. So I think this guy, 17 years old, he could be kind of the next entry fragger in NA behind Freakazoid, who really dedicate to the role and play that role and be able to perform at that role. Or Nitro could be it if he would embrace it. So it's kind of a race to see between Elise and Nitro who really can be like that next big entry fragger for NA. So far, I've seen hints of brilliance from both players, but no real consistent performance. Flowsick is a guy where he's never going to be like a huge fragger for you. He might have a hero game here or there where he plays really well, but he's not expected to be a big star on this team. And so I don't know if I can really criticize him too much or not. He definitely did have some poor maps at this event where he really, really played bad, which you need him to at least put up some numbers. But yeah, I don't know. Obviously, with the Dren, he's definitely had his struggles to do things with the op, and you've even seen him at times like not even want to op anymore full time, especially on T side of the map, where he'll even give it up to Nitro if Nitro wants it, or they just won't have an op at all. And so that definitely kind of hurts when you don't have someone that feels comfortable opping full time, because he's also in game leading for the team full time. Against CLG here at the Cologne qualifiers, he had one really bad map, but also one really good map. So consistency here too. Seems like consistency issues with individual players, something that I talked about a lot with CLG, also takes place on Liquid quite a lot. It's hard to say what can even happen for this team at this point. Can they bring in new players? Should they make moves? Should they consider trying to bring in Hiko for Flowsick, or should they consider going in a different direction entirely? I know Adrin has talked about thinking he could be a really good coach, so should he maybe consider coaching for a team and just kind of retire as a player and you move some people around? It seems like Hiko's not interested in joining this team because he had the opportunity to in the past and turned it down. Because he wanted to do things with his own organization. Maybe he's changed his mind since then. Not really sure. If you can't get him, who else could you bring in? Like I said, there's other guys out there from Ex-Nihilum, like Desi, like some of these other guys you might consider picking up. Maybe even try to snipe someone from Tempo Storm that's been showing some good performances between Sivo and the Cologne qualifiers, like a Rix or something like that, like a Shazam. I mean, I don't know. Like, Liquid's the biggest mystery for me on how to fix it, to be honest. I definitely think some roster moves could be in the works. I definitely think maybe some retiring or some shifts. Like, this team could get picked apart and move into, like, CLG teams. You could see some type of, like, Nihilum, Liquid, Ex-Nihilum, Liquid type of some combination of players from those two teams if CLG doesn't make any moves. I don't know, man. It's really up in the air for me. It's kind of disappointing to see them have some neutral performances at ESWC and Faceit Stage 2, and at one point they were kind of established themselves as one of the top 3 teams in NA, but now they're losing the CLG. They didn't qualify for the ESL finals. We've seen their players have huge highs but huge lows. I don't know what this team needs. I mean, I know they tried to bring in a coach between Sivo Land and the Cologne qualifiers. They brought in that James guy, who I personally don't really know him that well. I know a lot of people kind of said that he was like kind of a guy that's been around the scene for a while, but I don't recall him being a big guy in CSGO at least. I don't really know much about the 1.16, so I'm not even going to try to comment there, but I don't know what value he added or not. And obviously didn't have a lot of time with the team before Cologne qualifier, so you can't really gauge that too well. But yeah, I mean, I'm kind of lost on the Liquid thing. I definitely think some roster moves could be big. Like I said, consistency issues have been a problem, but I'll just kind of leave it at that because honestly, I don't even know how to judge my way through that one. It's kind of hard. Like I said, I've talked to a Jim personally about it sometimes. I've heard some different things about issues with like people accepting certain roles and things like that nature. I've even heard like Dats on an episode he did with Thorin on that counterpoints where he kind of talked about from a perspective where he was on this team and then got kicked. Some of the problems he faced with some of the players on the team, role-wise, not wanting to accept certain roles and duties and things like that. So maybe that could be a big problem that needs to be patched up. I don't know. I'm just going to leave it at that with Liquid because I know this video is already getting really long. And let's talk about some smaller stories. Some of the other teams that were at this event that obviously are really new teams or teams that are dying, so there's not much to say, but we can kind of at least briefly comment on some of these guys. So I'll start with Elevate, basically a brand new team coming into the Cologne qualifiers. Didn't expect much out of them, to be honest, just because like when you look at the roster, you didn't really see any huge names you thought would be like stars for them. Obviously, Naf has shown potential at times, but he's also had some rough times as well. You got Daps coming in as the in-game leader, who had some struggles with Liquid, and I had heard that he had struggled as in-game leader, had to get coached a lot by people like Adrin and stuff to kind of get him in the tip-top shape to be an in-game leader for the team. So I've heard some different stories there too, so I didn't really know what to expect out of him as an in-game leader. Yeah, I didn't know what to expect. Akis was like brand new, had never really heard of him. I knew he had played like some semi-pro CSGO. I think he even played like a little bit of Invite at 1.6 towards the end of ESCA 1.6. But, younger guy, didn't really know much about him. Like I said, besides semi-pro stuff that he had done in CSGO. First LAN for him, I think. Had no clue what to expect there. Like I said, they were a big mystery to me. So coming into this event, they actually impressed me, to be honest, with their performances. They challenged CLG pretty well in Overpass in the groups. with their first LAN game together as a team. XP3 actually looked really good, just dedicating to the op role and not having to do the in-game leadership. This is a guy that could maybe rise up and be like a big op in the NA scene. Now he's like focusing on that role specifically. Naf also played pretty well against CLG in this particular game. So yeah, I mean, that was a good opening game for them. They just, lost to CLG, a team that would go on to qualify for the event, and would be considered number 2 in NA. So decent challenge from a team like Elevate, who probably wasn't on many people's radar coming into this event. Now they crushed the Ex-Nihilum team on Cobble 16-3. I mean, Akis and Rush both in the 20s. Whole team plays well, actually. Good showing here to take out a team that, hadn't put in a lot of time. Didn't have probably the best prep, but they still had a lot of talent on the team between Hiko and even Desi's shown to be a good fragger in the NA scene on LAN. You had Simphis, who's been putting up good numbers in online play. So I mean, they had a lot of skill on that team, and so for a team like Elevate, who you would probably think has a little bit lesser skill when you look at the roster overall than overall in Ex-Nihilum, crushes Ex-Nihilum, and everyone plays really well. So good performance there. Then they beat Mythic in a close game to go to the playoffs. XP3 only shot a 30 bomb this game, really shows off well at the op. You got Naf playing okay. Rush plays pretty well actually here also. So good event. They make it and they get crushed by Cloud9 in the playoffs, but that was kind of to be expected, to be honest. So I think they actually overperformed, in my opinion, to what people probably predicted would happen. So this actually bodes well for them going forward. Maybe before this event, I didn't even know if they would really even be a playoff contender for the next seasons of SIVO and ESEA. Now they might be, a top 3, top 4 team in NA. We'll just have to see how it pans out. So I think they actually look pretty impressive. And if they wouldn't have gotten crushed by Cloud9 in the grand finals like they did in such one-sided fashion, they actually, for most of these players, probably overall would have had some pretty damn good stats against some top NA teams like Ex-Nihilum and CLG and Mythic. Granted, because they got kind of crushed by Cloud9, that kind of took everyone's stats down. I think everyone went negative on the team for the most part except for Rush. But if it wouldn't have been for that, XP3 and NAF put up good numbers. So I think this was actually a good showing for Elevate. It's a good thing for them to build off of. So look out for them to maybe be a playoff contender if their players don't get picked off, which I don't think that'll be the case. Look at Ex-Nihilum a little bit here. Maximum effort. Weren't able to qualify for any of the Pro League finals before this Cologne qualifier. At the Cologne qualifiers, they gave Mythic their first LAN map win, actually, or Ex-Luminosity, and they get crushed by Elevate. We talked about that already on Cobble when we talked about it from Elevate's perspective. This looked rough for them, to be honest, and I expected more out of them just because of skill-wise, but here's the deal. This team probably dead. From talking with some of the players who have previously been on the team, as well as some players who are currently on the team, and let's kind of understand that this team was probably dying. They obviously lost their sponsor going into this event and went in just underneath maximum effort. From what I understand, they had no real practice or preparation. Certain people didn't seem like they wanted to commit to practice enough. They wanted to focus on other things more, so they never really got to practice. In fact, some of their people are standing in for other teams or doing casting work or whatever, at an event a week before they're supposed to play at this qualifier. So obviously that's going to limit practice a lot. On top of some of the other issues they've apparently had with practice and preparation, even prior to that instance I'm talking about, SIVO LAN, where Sanks and Hiko are busy doing other things. It always seems like Simphis-led teams have had issues from what I've gathered from listening to Cloud9 and what I've even heard from people on the Nihilum team, either currently or prior or having left the team or being kicked already. That issue with the leadership dichotomy that doesn't work, where it's you have an in-game leader, but you have Simphis, putting in his word, and sometimes it overrules the in-game leader. I don't want to get into this again. I've already talked about it so many times with him and Sean on Cloud9. Apparently that issue still exists with him on this team with Valens, so that's obviously going to cause problems, I feel like. Simphis is a really smart guy, but there's a lot of instances where he's calling for force buys more than you probably should, and just different things like that. He obviously is a very gimmicky, scrimmy type of caller. He's even said so himself, and that's obviously not going to lay the foundation for consistent success. He might get you a win here or there, but it's not going to give you something consistent to build off of. I think this team's probably dead. I think some of these players on this team can definitely be really attractive people that CLG, Liquids, when these other teams can be looking at, depending on what they want to do. I think Desi can still be a good fragger, but I've heard about attitude issues in the past, and I've already talked about that in other vlogs, so I don't know if that still holds true or not. But he definitely can be a good fragger, and he seems like he's willing to accept pretty much any role as long as it'll help the team win and as long as he thinks that the team's going to be good based on what he's doing. So maybe that's someone you can still look at in the future. Obviously, Hiko's a very attractive, guy you can be looking at for a lurker on the team or a passive rifler on the team. So obviously, you can consider that. That's at least, I guess that's the two biggest things. And even Sangsington, honestly, to me, looks like he could be a pretty solid player. So maybe Sangs can be like an attractive, I keep saying attractive, not like physically attractive, not that they're ugly, but I'm not even getting to that, okay? I'm just saying it's like someone you would probably look towards that might be a guy that could be like I'm trying to think of how I want to put this. Just someone that would be, you think, maybe good for your team. Someone that looks like they could help you out. And I think those three names I just named are definitely names that come from this team that could maybe do something for another team. So I think this team probably just gets picked apart, and you see them kind of go their separate ways. Can't really see them sticking together at this point. And if they did, based on this performance and some of the online play inconsistencies, I can't really see this team doing much next season. Like I said, I think they'll just get picked apart. Finally, leaves me with the last two teams I want to talk about. First one's going to be Mythic. Obviously, some tough times at ESWC and CEVO, bringing in Devil Walk, so kind of a new team. They finally get themselves a map win against this Ex-Nihilum team. They actually challenged CLG pretty well at this event, though they do lose to Elevate, so they'll make it to the playoffs. Pitt and Peter actually playing pretty solid now that Peter's focusing on just opping. He had even some decent showings on some maps at CEVO, though the team didn't do well overall. Pitt seems like ever since I saw him playing individually at ESWC, he's looked better individually as a player and seems like he could be somebody that could be good for this team next to Peter as like a fragging position. At this lane, I even saw Anger play pretty well at a LAN for the first time in a long time. I think he dropped 30 against Ex-Nihilum on Cobble, though that was kind of a crushing win, so it was kind of, I guess, easy to do, but he was a big part of that. He put up some solid numbers against Elevate as well, though they did lose in that game. So yeah, it seemed like I finally saw Anger like show up at a lane individually, and like I said, I'm seeing some decent things out of Peter and Pitt. One thing I will say I'm a little bit concerned with is like Devil Walk came to the team to be kind of a coach, kind of an in-game leader, but he already gave up the in-game leading thing. Like Lex was the in-game leader for them at CEVO as well as at this event, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure Devil Walk's probably helping the team prepare, maybe helping Lex come up with tactics, maybe helping the team during practice, work on things. I'm sure he's still helping in that capacity. But he's not fragging that well for them at these LAN events I've been seeing him play at. It seems like he'd be better suited just being a coach or an in-game leader, but he doesn't seem to want an in-game lead. So if that's the case, maybe he's just a good coach like he was with Fnatic. I don't know, man. It just doesn't seem like he's fragging well from his role of being like a support player or whatever. So I don't know, though. Maybe he's still worth it to the team, even if he's not fragging well at LAN events, to help the team prepare, even if he's not going to in-game lead. I don't know. Like a player/coach type role. I think he can definitely help as a coach. As a player, I've yet to see it, but maybe he'll get better over time as he gets more comfortable with the team. If this team sticks together, we'll just have to see. Financial support definitely has to be something this team's worried about. It's obviously not going to matter while they're playing an online play, trying to qualify for LAN for the next seasons of ESEA and CEVO. But, trying to find some support if they actually qualify for some lanes and things like that are going to be big. Obviously, Pitt and Devil Walk, they're, from Sweden. They're living in the States. How long can they afford to do that without financial support? How long are they going to be able to stick around before, all of a sudden it's like, hey, we need to go back home. Like, this is not working out. I'm sure there has to be some type of clock there, some type of timer, some type of countdown that you have to be somewhat concerned with the longer they go without some type of sponsor that can financially make sure that these players can do this full time and that these guys don't have to worry about going back home, especially for Pitt and Devil Walk. We'll have to see. Definitely not, to me, a big favorite to be a playoff contender at this point in time, but maybe they can start showing me some more promising results if they can sit together as a five once Devil Walk gets more time with the team, helping them prepare. And if we can continue to, if Enger can use this LAN where he actually did well to build up some confidence and some consistency going forward, that could be really big. Like I said, Peter focusing on fragging with the op definitely could be big for him to continue to have some good performances. And like I said, it seems like Pitt's playing pretty decent lately. So I think the Peter, Pitt, Enger trio could be good. I'm more confident in Pitt and Peter being consistent, but maybe, like I said, Enger gains some confidence from this LAN. Maybe we can see some consistency out of them. He's always been quite good online, at least, so they could still maybe be a playoff contender, but I think some of these other teams have shown me a bit more, but we'll just have to see going forward. And one of those teams that have shown me a bit more is, in fact, Tempo Storm, who had a really impressive CEVO LAN. took VP to the brink on Cash 13-16, but even had a decent showing on Train. See them play against Navi. They're able to take a map off Navi in triple overtime on Inferno and push them to the brink on Mirage. Very, very close score there. They eliminated, Mythic from the event, or Ex-Luminosity, whatever. I think they were still Luminosity at the CVO event. They eliminated them in a 2-1 series. At CVO, they all performed pretty equal. I mean, I guess like Rix and Shazam stood out the most, but and Roke also had some really highlight moments. But overall, the whole 5 of the team, it seemed like all of them are only within like 3 or 4 frags of each other. So really just good overall team performance. And they looked really impressive. For a team that was probably on no one's radar coming into CVO, and I've already made this comment myself, they actually impressed me quite a lot. And they looked really, really good. Given they had been such a new team, given that many of those guys hadn't really landed much at all, if at all, given, like I said, just given the situation and all the circumstances, they actually looked really, really good at CVO. I had really good hopes for them. Now, going into the Cologne qualifiers, they lose to Liquid twice, basically, in the groups to not make it to playoffs. Shazam and Rick still put up really good numbers, so those 2 players look really good between CVO and this event. Roka, Automatic, and Stanislav struggled a lot in comparison to the CVO event, even against, I would say, lesser competition. Like, they're putting up good numbers against, Navi and VP, but against Liquid, some of these guys, like I said, Roka, Automatic, and Stanislav were struggling a bit. And I guess Automatic had some struggles at CVO as well, actually. So that kind of sucked. They didn't get the consistency out of those 3 guys. I think if you did have those 3 guys perform better, you probably would have seen Tipo Storm maybe have a better shot at qualifying for Cologne. But I think still going forward, if they keep this 5 together, they can definitely be a playoff contender for the next seasons of CVO and ESEA. No doubt about it, they could be a top 4 team in those leagues and make it to similar lands as a 5. I think with Warden as a coach, he's going to help that team out a lot with the experience and knowledge that he has. So I definitely actually think that Timbo Storm has kind of a bright future. We've already seen these guys put up some decent showings lately. Like I said, if they can just stick it out, not get picked apart, not get some players sniped by some other teams that might be looking for players in like a roster shuffle, I think they can do some good things. I'm seeing some good performances and some potential out of some of these players on this team, and they seem to play well as a team. So, yeah. Obviously, tactically and strategically, there's some lacking there. Most of their good performances were based off of just really good fragging and really big aggression out of the team and being able to use that aggression and fragging ability well. When that doesn't work out for you, when that runs out, do you have something to fall back on? Maybe not at this point, but I think maybe over time, especially with Warden's help, they can build up some better strategy and build up some consistency. So yeah, I actually kind of like their future. And that basically wraps up for this video. It's been quite long, but I'll timestamp it in the parts so you can just kind of focus on what team you want to listen to, maybe watch it at different times, whatever. Hopefully this will be, somewhat informative, and thanks a lot for tuning in, and be on the lookout for more stuff in the future. Thanks.